Hey. Hello, hello. Thanks for coming out. This is the last banger of the day, I think. We're gonna try to close it out strong. I just came straight from the airport. I'm a little delirious, so if I start rambling incoherently, just yell out. I will respond, maybe. I am very excited to be here tonight. Let's give another round of applause for Molly White here, who I'm going to be interviewing. I couldn't hear. I tried to talk the announcer into calling her the crypto queen. I couldn't hear if that was actually said or not. But anyways, well, thanks all for coming out here instead of the crypto summit in the White House. I know it was there are two draws going on with David Sachs or Molly White. I think you've chosen correctly. But we are going to talk tonight about speaking truth to crypto power. How does that sound?
Works for me.
Yeah, good. I mean, where to even begin, really? This year has already, contained multitudes on the crypto front alone. We have a president with not one but multiple meme coins. We have had a, I think, historic Bitcoin heist. We have had a crypto reserve announced, a national crypto reserve, and the aforementioned crypto summit happening today at the White House. So just to get our bearings a little bit, you've been at this for a while. When you're thinking about, doing what you do and speaking truth to crypto power, how do you even begin in a year like this, looking at what we're all looking at?
Yeah, it's a little different now than it was when I started. I started writing about cryptocurrency in 2022, I think it was. Maybe 2021 is when I started sort of first doing it. And it was still a little more on the fringes back then. I really got into it when I noticed it was making a real mainstream debut, and people were being very actively marketed to in ways that they hadn't before. But it was not accepted in the way that it is right now, with Bitcoin ETFs offered by BlackRock, and Donald Trump boosting his own meme coin, and White House crypto czars and all this stuff. So I was speaking truth to sort of a different kind of power at that point, a lot less state power, a lot more industry power. And so it's been a little bit alarming to see the change, and very interesting just from the perspective that, when I first started, I was really interested in the topics that, cryptocurrency people tend to talk about, currency that is separate from the government. It's not controlled by financial institutions, big banks and all that kind of stuff. I was really interested in the ideology of a lot of it, because it actually is pretty compelling in some ways. The idea that there's too much financial surveillance, and there's this constant control over what you're doing with your money and who you're sending it to, and there are downsides to that, to be sure. And so it's been weird to sort of engage with that ideology and then see that ideology almost melt away as things have changed politically, where now the intervention by the government is a good thing, it seems like, for much of the crypto industry. And people in the crypto world are excited that Fidelity and BlackRock are talking about Bitcoin now and getting heavily involved. So
it used to be more of an ideological opposition. You don't want the state and the big banks, and maybe just for a little bit of background to anyone who's not familiar, how did you? So your first sort of best known project was maybe Web3 is going just great. You have a background as a programmer and a prominent Wikipedian. So how did you sort of get in 2022? How did you get into crypto in the first place? Into covering crypto? Because obviously there's a lot going on in the tech world and in the tech industry. How did you come to have that be your post Web3 is going just great project?
Yeah, so I was working full time at that point as a software engineer, and I was not a writer at that point in time. But I had begun to see all of the coverage of crypto in sort of the mainstream media when it was really booming. NFTs were huge, and Justin Bieber was going out and buying an NFT, and like all these celebrities were changing their profile pictures to NFTs, and there was just this huge marketing push. FTX bought the FTX arena. It was like this huge sudden change, and the mainstream media, from what I was seeing, was really covering it in the way that it was like, look at this new exciting thing, maybe you should buy it. And there were all of these like profiles of 25-year-olds who sold their car and bought Dogecoin and became a millionaire, and like that was the story that was everywhere. And I was also seeing, along the same period of time, stories of people who were getting absolutely wiped out. They would buy a token and it would get stolen from them, or they would get convinced that this new NFT project was going to be the next big thing, and then the developer would just run off with all the money. And I would see those, but they would just sort of flash by on Twitter or wherever, and no one was writing about them at the time. And so my first thought was like, well, I'll go write a Wikipedia article about it, because that's the kind of writing I was doing in my free time. But Wikipedia is really not the right place to write about like some random rug pull that nobody really knows about. And so I was like, okay, so I decided to just create a website and track them more or less chronologically there. And it turned out there was like kind of a lot of appetite for that, because I think a lot of people out there were having that same thought of like, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't quite seem right that there is all of this money and celebrity influence and, huge companies getting involved in something, NFTs, digital currency, not sure what it really is. And there was sort of no countervailing voice. And so that's when I started Web3 is going just great. And then, as time went on, I ended up becoming basically a full-time writer, writing about this because it felt like there was a need for it.
Yeah, and then that just because crypto's so sort of bound up in the Web3 environment, then so that kind of made a natural transition. And how are you still focusing on Web3 stuff? I know there's still stuff out there. Maybe what is, out of curiosity, what is the state of Web3 right now, and how is it relating to the crypto world?
Yeah, so Web3 is going just great is named because at the time Web3 was what everyone was talking about. Like that was making the headlines, like Web3, it's the new web, it's a number above the current web, so it's the next one, I guess. And so that's what I named the project. But the project has always been broader than just Web3. It's always talked about Bitcoin thefts and stuff like that, even though most people wouldn't describe Bitcoin as like a Web3 project. So the name maybe needs a change, but I've always sort of covered anything that has a blockchain attached to it.
Yeah, when does it become Web3 went just great?
Yeah, that's true. You don't hear as much about Web3 these days. It crops up once in a while, but it definitely, like, someone will say something about, like, we're getting into Web3, and I'm like, whoa, it's like this weird blast from the past where it's like, did you just time travel from, like, 2 years ago?
A couple years behind, I guess. Well, it comes back. Things come back. The metaverse, the bodied internet, that day in the sun, things could always come back, I suppose. But talking about people who have been sort of victims to various frauds and schemes or rug pulls or pump and dumps. You mentioned that, and that nobody was covering them, and that the theme of our talk today being what it is, and the fact that we are now looking at this brand new sort of regulatory structure or lack thereof, where all those things that you're just talking about are now about to play out at sort of the largest scale. What are you thinking about as you're even, beginning to sort of hatch plans to sort of keep track of all this, to cover it? What's most interesting to you? What worries you the most?
Yeah, so my job, such as it is, has really changed over time. When I first started, it was all about just paying attention to the new crypto projects that were launching and then exploding, writing about people getting hacked or scammed. Then I went through a period of time where I was reading a lot of lawsuits and court documents in the 2022 time period, when it felt like every crypto exchange went bankrupt all at once. And, there were criminal cases against Sam Bankman-Fried and Changpeng Zhao and, all these other figures in the crypto world. And it was like I was just reading court documents all day long. And then it was a long period of reading FEC filings and tracking crypto industry spending in the US election cycle. And now it's a lot of looking at what the government is doing and following the changes to regulatory cases, the end of many of them in the last month or so. And then seeing where we're going to go from here, because there is a lot changing at the policy level and not in the direction of more regulation, which I think is going to keep me very busy.
Yeah, I'll say. And it doesn't get as much sort of airtime as maybe Elon spent $250 million on the election, but that's about what the crypto industry spent in efforts, facilitated by some of the big players, Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, and that Doge and sort of Elon Musk's political role has been very front and center. Is sort of the creation of this Bitcoin reserve and the sort of demolition of the regulatory apparatus that would have taken on Bitcoin, is that sort of the outcome of all that spend in this big crypto push by lobbyists and over the election cycle last year?
Absolutely. I mean, the crypto industry was very explicit in its goals to install crypto-friendly regulators and legislators and president. They spoke very clearly about, if you go up against the crypto industry, if you speak out against the crypto industry, we will get you out of office and replace you with someone who is pro-crypto. They were very clear about their distaste for the SEC and its regulatory agenda over the last administration. And we've now seen sort of the rapid disassembly, I guess, if we want to use Elon's words, of some of those crypto enforcement cases against those same donors. I mean, Coinbase was one of the biggest crypto donors this past cycle. Their SEC case was dropped and dismissed with prejudice, actually, so it can't be refiled. We've seen the same with Kraken was a huge donor. Those cases are being dropped. The Ripple case is likely to be dropped if it hasn't already. The cases against Binance. I mean, it's just a complete wipeout across the board. Any type of enforcement action from the SEC is pretty much over. The crypto industry has been somewhat unhappy with me pointing this out, that there's like this kind of clear line between those donations and this outcome. The Coinbase legal counsel keeps threatening me with defamation for saying that, even though he himself was like, you're not paying attention to the fact that that Donald Trump called Bitcoin a scam, and then he changed his mind after we gave them all this money. And I was like,
wow, imagine that.
Yeah.
I mean, as you also have pointed out, in our previous conversations and elsewhere, though, yes, this does sort of open the door to, more fraud and more abuse and more, and potentially, more bad actors in the space. But that also, could be bad for the industry too, right? If we have this total Wild West where, there's going to be no protection for consumers who we already know are quite vulnerable in a lot of cases to, to say an exchange collapsing, for example. So where, is the industry, as you follow it, I mean, yeah, Coinbase is, heckling you online, but are you seeing any reflexivity or any awareness of that fact at all?
Yeah, so you hear that a lot when these companies actually talk about regulation. Is they say, we do want regulation. We want clear rules of the road. We want, responsible regulation that allows us to do our business, but protects consumers from frauds and all that kind of thing, which I think is actually a very reasonable thing to want, because the more, responsible regulation you have in a sector, the more confidence consumers will have in that sector, because they feel feel like, they're not going to put their tokens into an exchange that suddenly just disappears overnight and then they have no recourse. But the actions coming from the cryptocurrency companies and their reactions to a lot of the regulatory changes, I think really belie the fact that they want no regulation, or basically, essentially no regulation. They've been celebrating the fact that many of these cases have been dropped, including cases alleging fraud. Which is what they have said they would like to see regulators paying attention to, and yet they are, pleased to see cases alleging fraud be dropped. We recently had the SEC come out and say that they were not going to be considering meme coins as within the remit of that regulator, with no sort of point to who might be regulating that. They were sort of like, well, someone could, I guess, and then there was like no follow-up on that. So, I think we're getting a very different story in terms of what they say in the press releases about, responsible regulation versus what they are actually supporting and cheering when it's happening. I think that the smarter people in the crypto world would be more vocally advocating for stronger regulations and consumer protections. But I think that many of the companies in the crypto sector realize that if they are required to follow consumer protection regulations, that's expensive and it's onerous and it's challenging to comply with in some cases. And they have been able to get away without complying with it for a long time, and I think would like to continue.
Yeah, and it is, it's pretty standard for companies to want less regulation. We see that in the AI space as well. But it is, one of those things that's almost certain to come back to bite, if not the companies, then consumers and potentially the economy at large. But it really is just like such a remarkable moment. There's there's so much going on, and it's hard to even just sort of stay fixated on one event or one happening for long. But I mean, just the fact that we live in an era where the president of the United States has a meme coin and is almost certainly personally profiting off of that, and that's not even the first or second order story of the day. How are you thinking about that? Have you looked closely at what's going on with the Trump coins and Melania's coin? What's the latest there?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a challenge right now, is it feels sort of like covering crypto is putting out the tiny fire while the whole house is burning over here. And it's why am I focused on crypto right now? But, I think there's something to be said for doing what you know and sort of writing about what you're familiar with, and letting people who are experts in other areas take the reins in those spaces. Which is, partly why I keep writing about crypto, although I do occasionally stray into other areas where it feels like there is something important to cover. When it comes to the meme coin, I mean, that was really shocking. And I think it was shocking not just for crypto skeptics and people like me who, have a degree of skepticism and, concern around the crypto industry. It was actually really shocking for people in the crypto industry as well, which was really interesting to watch. The night that coin launched, there was sort of this initial, what's that? And then there was this moment of did Trump's Twitter account get hacked? Because that happens so often that a Twitter account gets hacked and they launch a coin and everyone was like, oh. And then it was oh no, this is actually the president launching a meme coin. And there was this sudden wave of horror from a lot of the crypto industry that had this reaction of everyone is going to think crypto is a scam now. Which for people like me, I was yeah.
Well, just a show of hands. First of all, did anybody know that that Trump had a meme coin? Show of hands, if everybody who knew, if you were aware of this fact, and keep them up or put them up again if you were surprised or shocked by this. Okay, so about half. Yeah, I mean, because Trump is a singular character, we all know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I was shocked for a minute in the sense that in a normal world, no president would ever do this. But then there's that moment of but it's Trump. And so, yeah, and that has been happening to me a lot lately of well, in a normal world, this would be horrifying. In this world, it's horrifying, but also predictable. But yeah, so, with the Trump coin, it was really interesting to watch this play out in sort of the biggest possible scale because, meme coins have been having kind of a renaissance lately. They were very popular for a while before Trump launched one, but he was certainly one of the most high-profile figures to launch one ever, probably. And watching that play out at that scale and in the sort of global conversation was really fascinating. And then sort of seeing some of the behind the scenes that has come out as time has gone on when there's been other scandals, for example, about the Libra meme coin, which was launched by Argentina's president. And, there was some scandal around that launch with insider trading and allegations of corruption among some of the people working at the Solana infrastructure companies, and some connections to the team that was launching the Melania token, which is concerning, I would say. But, it sort of, I think, is a good illustration of the fact that there is so much wrongdoing in the crypto world that is really not even addressed, but not even looked at. It's independent investigators. It's CoffeeZilla on YouTube, like digging around, trying to find out what's going on. And it's like, why is CoffeeZilla having to do this? Why is this guy like the one interviewing the guy who just launched this meme coin and then like rug pulled $100 million worth of it? But there's no one else doing it, and so that's who's left, really. And that's kind of been the feeling in the blockchain and crypto world for a long time, where, probably the best blockchain crime investigator is an anonymous guy named ZachXBT on Twitter. And it's like, why is this guy the one having to do all of this?
Yeah. And we have this question that I think is relevant, so we might as well hit it right now. It's from Akash Nanda. The question is, with rug pulls being prevalent, he mentions Haktua. I think it's yet to be seen, like the Libra coin or any number of these Trump-related endeavors. Are retail investors with no recourse on exchanges like FTX, is there real value being produced on any of these, or real use cases?
Well, that's kind of the thing with meme coins, is like there isn't a use case. That's the point. There is no Web3 product behind the scenes where it's like, yeah, you buy the token and then you get the, vote in the way that we run the business. And, like 2 years ago, it was all about this sort of like business scheme where people would be able to buy in, and then turned out the SEC wasn't super fond of that whole thing. And so now it's like, okay, meme coins are going to be the thing, and there's going to be no point whatsoever. And so then it's like, well, yeah, there is no value there. I mean, before, I guess you could argue that there was some value in like the business that someone was going to try to run, or there was going to be some, we were seeing projects like, Helium. We're going to incentivize people to set up, like 5G modems and, bootstrap a company this way. And with meme coins, it's like, oh, no, there's nothing there.
Yeah. Nothing there. I mean, how long do you think can this go? Is it just going to perpetually go on? Because, I mean, it really is. It's just people think that they can be fast enough to get out on top, right? And just time and time again, whether you have direct insider knowledge or you think you're going to be the quickest to pull the trigger and get out, like, I mean, how many times can this cycle repeat itself?
That was something that it took me a minute to learn when I started talking to people in the crypto world early on, and even before the meme coin saga, where I would talk to somebody and I would be like, this is a scam, right? Like I would be showing them some project that was like, we're going to give you 50% APY if you just, it's like all this stuff. And I'm like, that's a scam. Like that can't be, that's not possible. And they'd be like, oh yeah, I know. And I was like, why are you involved in this? And they're like, well, if I can get in and out quickly enough, I can make a lot of money. And I was like, oh, okay, we're having a very different conversation than I thought we were having, where people were basically like, yes, it's a scam, but if I buy early and sell early, all those suckers who get in late will subsidize my profits, and so I can drive my Lambo off into the sunset. Right. And it was like, all right, I think I'm going to need to change my framing here a little bit.
Yeah, it's just such a deeply unhealthy way because they're acknowledging that there's going to be losers every time, and that there's people who are going to get hurt by this stuff. Yeah, I think that it also has a lot to say. We don't have to drill into it today, but the more broad, casinoification of culture in general.
Right. I mean, that's sort of what I was going to say is like there is this like moment happening with crypto, but we've seen it with meme stocks, everyone becoming day traders during COVID. Sports betting now is very prevalent, and there's sort of this feeling that like, all right, you can't make it anymore by just working a 9 to 5 or even 2 9 to 5s. Like you're not going to get that dream where you can buy the 3-bedroom house with a picket fence and support the family on, the single income or even 2 incomes. And if you want to change your circumstances and be able to like send your kids to college or whatever, you have to take insane risk, essentially gambling to do that. And there are a lot of people who feel that way, that like there just isn't the path to improve their circumstances. And so let's just, put it all on black at the roulette wheel, or, try to find the next meme coin that's going to 1000x, or, bet on GameStop stock going to the moon or whatever it might be. And it's like that is finance now for a lot of people. They sort of, they don't see the possibility of upward mobility due to, all of the factors that are causing people to sort of remain, trapped in poverty or in, sort of living paycheck to paycheck. And so it's this feeling that, all right, let's just try this crazy thing and see if we can make it big like that guy we saw on the news.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does also sort of relatedly hand a great deal of power to the people who do have sort of the information, or who have the levers, who own the exchanges. And then I think that's one of the great risks of this moment. We laugh about the crypto summit right now, but with some of these people becoming, so sort of ingrained and so, so tightly knit into the state, and having this Bitcoin reserve that is, it's right now it's still kind of opaque, the details how it's all going to work out. But does that, does having sort of this new sort of class, we have a crypto czar now, right, who comes from Silicon Valley, and is as well as Coinbase and Armstrong, who you mentioned earlier, wielding influence at this level. So what are the opportunities now of sort of this, more this ultra powerful, super well connected class have to, what kind of power are they going to be able to wield in the coming years?
Yeah, well, it's another one of those sort of upsetting things from the ideological perspective where, when I was first getting into writing about crypto and learning about the ideology and speaking to people, there was this idea that crypto was going to help with wealth inequality. It was going to, even the memes in like 2021, 2022, people were like, "Wag me, we're all gonna make it," like everyone's gonna get rich together. And you don't hear that anymore. And there was this idea that crypto was somehow going to tear apart the financial inequality that many in the crypto world blamed on, traditional finance and sort of the mega wealthy who were, able to get access to financial instruments that, the everyday person who's not an accredited investor or whatever it might be, can't even access, or, borrow money in the way that rich people can borrow money. And that was going to be the sort of great equalizer with crypto. And I feel like that dream has really died a little bit with the changes that we've seen politically, where, the crypto elites essentially have become horrifically wealthy. I mean, billionaires off of early Bitcoin purchases, or their companies that are, sort of skimming off the top of the retail crypto investors by taking fees and things like that. And then there's sort of the everyday guy who is, holds Bitcoin maybe, and, maybe they've had some gains on that over the years, or, hopefully they've picked the right tokens and they still have something left and it's not lost in the depths of FTX somewhere. But, there is this stratification within the crypto world as well, where now there is just sort of this like horrifying parallel with traditional finance, where now instead of the mega wealthy bankers and people running these investment firms, it's the mega wealthy crypto exchange owners and people who are crypto VCs and Andreessen Horowitz and all those guys. And not only are they getting incredibly wealthy, even as people are wiped out in the crypto world, they're also in the White House setting policy for their own companies and dictating, what they're going to be allowed to do, which is at this point getting into things like lending and staking and, a lot of stuff that was previously frowned upon by regulators for good reason in the consumer protections end of things. And they're actively fighting off the idea of increasing consumer protections that would require them to offer even the types of fairly limited protections that there are for traditional investors. And so, things are, instead of creating this sort of utopian financial world, we're giving everybody access to financial instruments that were once tools of the wealthy and unavailable to everyday people. Now it's sort of the veneer of that, but with no consumer protections, no fraud investigations. And so, it's this sort of predatory version of the traditional financial system where people are getting completely wiped out. And, we've seen this happen over and over and over again, especially in 2022 when so many companies washed out, where, I think Celsius is a really good example of this. There was a guy up on a stage telling people that banks are not your friends, that crypto companies like his were going to give you all of the returns that banks were greedily keeping to themselves. And we're safer than a bank, we're more trustworthy than a bank, and the next thing you know, the money's all gone, the guy's on trial for fraud, and people are suddenly surprised that there was no FDIC insurance, there is no backstop in the way that there would be with a savings account. And a lot of the people who fell victim to Celsius were like everyday people who were like, this is going to be my savings account. It was elderly people. It was people who were sick and who needed the money for their medical bills. I mean, it was not like the Lambo, college student trying to gamble his second job's paycheck or whatever and go to the moon. It was like real people who needed the money.
Yeah. Do you see a potential for sort of that that backlash to, or that anger, or that that loss to be catalyzed? I mean, we talked about how it's could even be unhealthy for the industry in the long term if people don't trust it, and then if it does turn into purely this casino where it seems like only the most privileged players can win. But with things like the Trump meme coin, with Melania coin, with the newly unregulated sort of apparatus of just dealing with Bitcoin at all, is there a political risk of this new environment? Are you seeing any backlash beginning? We have a question here about like the most uncovered aspect of the Trump meme coin is like who's actually buying it, which is a great question. We were actually just talking about that too. But if people get really burned on this, do you think there's a possibility that translates into a political cost for not just these companies, but for the Republican Party, who's now so closely entwined with the enterprise?
Yes, I think if I was working in the crypto industry, I would be very concerned about that. I think that people who believe that we're going to reach capitalist nirvana by just getting rid of all the regulators and letting the free market sort it out, and if you get scammed, you should have been smarter, are going to learn a hard lesson about the fact that people are used to there being consumer protections. That's partly why American markets are so strong, is that there is a fairly strong regulatory regime that avoids, most people who open a bank account don't go and inspect all the small print about the bank because they're worried the bank might go insolvent and their money might disappear and there's going to be nothing left. They just put the money in the account, and every once in a while a bank goes under, and yeah, there's drama about it and it's hard for the bankers, but your $250,000 is protected, right? And that does not exist in the crypto world, where everyone is expected to do their own due diligence in a way that most people are frankly unable to do and do not have the time to do because they have jobs and kids and hobbies and things that are in their lives. And so I think that very reasonable people see the chaos of the crypto world. They see the Trump meme coin going to $75 and then coming back down, and most people losing money. They see FTX exploding and Celsius exploding, and years of people, watching lawsuits and praying that they get their money back. And they say, you know what? I don't want anything to do with that. I am going to put my money somewhere else. I am going to just stay away from that. And I think that in 2022, we saw a major change in public perception of the crypto world, where it went from buzzy headlines about, is Web3 going to be the future? And look at this guy who just bought a mansion with all of the crypto money he made, to the headlines about FTX collapsing and people losing their money. And everyday people saw that and were like, wow, crypto's a scam. And even though the prices have recovered and people are, in the crypto world are talking about, oh, crypto winter's over, I really don't think public perception has changed that much. I don't think that, the average person walking down the street is like, yeah, crypto's the future. This is going to be the next, future of finance. And, they're like, why is Trump, is he buying Bitcoin? And is it my tax money that's doing, there's like all of this question of like, this looks like a grift, right? Like that's a grift, right? And I think that the crypto world would do well to be very worried about that. Where, they've been excited to see institutional investors coming in with Bitcoin ETFs, and so there's sort of money coming in from a different direction, and they're not so worried about retail. But I think that public perception is a serious issue, and they are doing nothing to convince people that, crypto is a safe place, because frankly, it's not. They are dismantling the regulators. They are getting rid of any consumer protections that they can. And so I think that, it's going to be a very rude awakening when they realize that people just don't want to take that kind of risk most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting. And yet, it is just I guess it just kind of speaks to, any well-heeled industry that can, that has enough of a powerful lobbying arm or has enough cultural grist in the mill. Because we just saw, even after all of that, even after SBF and the collapse of FTX, even after all the turmoil that caused, there was still this moment where, it was reported that Kamala Harris's advisors were like, well, we have to go reach back out to the crypto community. So what keeps bringing people back to the well? Is it just the sheer amount of money that's sloshing around, or is there some like sort of cultural component that is there that that's sort of embedded in the broader pop culture that we have to deal with one way or another?
So I have to give credit to the cryptocurrency industry, something I don't do very often. They did run a very savvy political strategy over the last election cycle. And it was sort of this multi-pronged approach where they were obviously raising tons of money and giving it to politicians and spending it on various congressional races mostly. And they also sort of generated this idea that crypto is something that people care about and like they care about it in a good way. And that if you're a politician, you need to appeal to this idea of a crypto voter who might be, out in numbers that could actually affect your race. And so they commissioned polls that claimed that, so many Americans supported crypto, they held crypto, they wanted to see change in crypto regulations. And not only that, but this was something that, they really cared about to the point that they might cross the political aisle or they might overcome disagreements on other policy issues. And I think that was actually very effective, not with everyday people who, you can't really go up to someone and be like, you care about crypto, don't you? But with the political machinery, where the Democratic presidential campaign was like, do we need to pay attention to this? And, there were Democratic Congress people who were suddenly talking about crypto when they had not previously shown much interest or when they had even been skeptical in the past. And I think that money went a long way, where they were able to really convince people that, this is some sort of an issue that broadly speaking, people care about and people want. And there was just very little, I think, connection between political candidates and their actual constituents on the issues there, where, there wasn't much opposition narrative there. And I think that's kind of one of the bigger problems with talking about the crypto industry is, they have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on PR and polls and press releases and all this stuff. And there is no okay, but what do people actually, there is no unbiased research out there for the most part. There is no anti-crypto lobby, that's just yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I think that really explained a lot of the political change, was the money and the sort of narrative that they were able to gin up. But I don't think that it's accurate to say that there was this outpouring of crypto voters in the way that, the industry tried to claim.
Right, just a really well-organized, well-orchestrated campaign. Was it Charles Duhigg that had a great New Yorker piece about about what was it? It's Fair Shake was where I think with Katie Porter was and barely talked about crypto, but sort of just woke up one day and she's getting attack ads that were just bankrolled by the crypto lobby.
Right, and there was an amazing quote in that piece with one of the people at Fair Shake, which is again the biggest crypto super PAC, who, when someone presented him with the idea that hey, I don't think there is this this crypto voter out there, his response was, "Well, just create one.
We'll make it." Right.
Yeah, and so I mean, it was brazen that it was not about reflecting the wants of the people or anything like that. It was really just about the industry sowing the narrative that would be useful to them, and then backing it up with massive amounts of political contributions.
Yeah. I'm curious, how many people in this audience have crypto in one form or another? Hands up. Okay, a lot. Now, we can't really, do a more complicated survey or anything. But how are we feeling? If you do have crypto, 2 hands up for feeling good, 1 hand up for feeling bad. I'm just curious about how we're thinking about the future, how we're feeling about the future. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because it's still a lot. I have friends with crypto who lost money in related to the SBF, the collapse of FTX, and who had been just like you said, just kind of working family, putting money in every week, a little bit of the paycheck, like it was the rainy day fund. Lost a bunch of it in I think it was a BlockFi, I think, that crashed, and to my knowledge, back doing it again, because it's the promise or the gains are quite strong. So I mean, I do think that it is, I guess, and I saw the question posed over here too, so I'll ask that too. Do you see a form in which crypto can be a positive force? Can it be a good, or is it just kind of, given the makeup of our society and where we're at right now, it's just all but impossible that it's going to take a healthy form for society?
Yeah, so I mean, I do see instances in which crypto has done good. I think it would be crazy for someone to claim that crypto is only bad and there's no circumstance in which someone has benefited from crypto. People do make money from crypto. That's a fact. There are circumstances that are, very compelling, where people are able to escape authoritarian regimes because they put their money into Bitcoin and they crossed a border and, they were able to get out and they weren't sewing diamonds into their hems and stuff like that. There are crypto projects that have funded important work. I mean, it's true that there are good things that come out of the crypto world. The problem, in my view, is, there's several problems, but one problem, in my view, is that many of these good things about crypto, that story about a person fleeing an authoritarian regime, are extrapolated to very broad use cases that it's not really proper to extrapolate to. The idea of someone being able to, someone who's in a circumstance that is so dire that they are converting whatever money they have into something that they can smuggle across a border. Any solution is a good solution in that circumstance, right? Like any way you can get out with some assets and start a new life in a better place is going to be a good solution. A bad solution can be a good solution in that circumstance, but it does not mean that that bad solution is a good solution for every problem that may come up in front of somebody. It also doesn't necessarily mean that that solution is scalable to everyone in that circumstance. And so, for example, we see if people are trying to use crypto to flee authoritarian regimes, for example, those regimes ban crypto, or they make it very dangerous for people to buy crypto or acquire crypto, or they make it very challenging for you to cash out your crypto, or you end up in this black market where people are taking 20% off the top in order for you to get any of your assets back out. And so, there are these forces at play that I think people either naively don't think about or conveniently ignore when they try to use stories like that to talk about crypto being broadly good. And then I think, people will often fail to consider, the sort of both sides of the story, the pros and the cons, where, okay, so here's a case where someone has benefited from crypto in some way. Does that justify the crypto industry that has emerged? This enormously extractive industry that is buying the United States government at this point. Like, are we willing to accept that as sort of a necessary evil in order to, allow the use cases that are coming out? And so I think it's a challenging thing to address, where it's like, you really just can't boil it down to like crypto good, crypto bad, because like I do think crypto is good in some cases. Like I support some cases of people who use crypto, but when you look at the crypto industry, which is what I mostly write about these days, that I think is just incredibly problematic at this point and needs grappling with.
Yeah, no, you're harder on crypto than I am on AI. I love it. For the last 10 or 15 minutes here, I'm going to do questions, Q&As to the audience. So if you have questions for Molly, I think you put them up through the app or in here, or I don't know, you can... Okay, your press.
So regarding BlackRock and Fidelity, State Street is stating that crypto ETFs will surpass precious metals by the end of this year, making it the third ETF value of over $15 trillion. So do you see that the crypto market is basically being centralized the way Google, Apple, and Microsoft has centralized access to internet trade and commerce through the monopolization of the OS market, the Android OS, Apple iOS, and Microsoft Windows OS, being that those are the three on-ramps to the internet, and they control that while controlling the global distribution and development of AI-infused apps. So it seems like there's some movement of centralization going on here, and I would like to get your thoughts on it.
I mean, I think the crypto industry is incredibly centralized, just broadly speaking. When it comes to the centralization in terms of who holds Bitcoin, there's always been an enormous amount of centralization there, either with mining pools or exchanges, and now we're seeing it with ETFs, and that's sort of a whole nother vector for that to be happening. There's been enormous centralization in terms of who is, running the major infrastructure in the crypto world. And so I've always really questioned the idea that crypto is decentralized as just sort of a statement of fact, because it is in some ways, and it really is not in other ways. And it's another one of those things, this centralization as a result of Bitcoin ETFs and ETH ETFs and other crypto assets, that I think, I'm like, why is there's so little talk of this in the cryptocurrency world, where people who, claim to be very ideological about crypto, who, care about decentralization, who care about the idea that, Bitcoin could never be attacked because it is so distributed and it is so decentralized. And then we're seeing this like a massive amount of centralization in so many different areas within the crypto world. And there's very little conversation happening about that. So I do agree that there's a big issue there.
And as a net result of internet centralization, we're starting to see AI copyright and IP infringement with the Scarlett Johansson lawsuit, meaning that people's IP and copyright are actually being stolen and scraped off the internet. But there's no oversight for consumer protection there. And are you seeing, basically you said earlier, you don't see anything on the horizon for consumer protection in this marketplace?
I mean, I think the crypto industry regulation is a symptom of a much broader problem around tech industry regulation and just sort of like business regulation in general, where we have seen the enormous abuse of customers and sort of everyday people who are using products built by the tech industry, who are pretty much helpless in terms of what those companies are able to do to them, whether it be privacy violations or abusive business practices, monopoly behavior. I think it's a massive issue, and crypto regulation is certainly a part of it. But it goes much more beyond that.
This one's been sitting at the top for a little while, so we'll do that real quick. Do you make a distinction between crypto and Bitcoin? Why or why not?
It depends on the circumstance. There are circumstances where it makes sense to talk about Bitcoin specifically. If I'm talking about like a Bitcoin ETF, there is no Doge ETF yet. And so like Bitcoin is relevant there, or there are ways in which Bitcoin is different from other cryptocurrencies that are is important to note. But if this is sort of the like Bitcoin not crypto type of thing, I don't give a whole lot of credence to that talking point, where it's like Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency and it is one of many cryptocurrencies. And I do understand the distinctions between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but a lot of this is sort of the, no true Scotsman type of thing, where it's like, well, not my cryptocurrency. And it's like, oh my God.
And this next one kind of touches on a little bit the phenomenon that you were talking about, where we're seeing less sort of, I think, striving for necessarily innovation in this space, where there's less sort of big ambitions with making new stuff, or at least less talk of it, or at least it's seeded into the background a little bit, given what's going on at the federal level and beyond. But this question: what is the future of crypto in B2B payments? Are you seeing anything where it's coming back, where they're trying to make the case for using this, more functionally? Is that worth touching on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the crypto sort of vibe change over time, where when I was first starting to write a lot about it, it was all about what we could use crypto to do, what can we use blockchains to enable, what businesses can we build on this, what services can we provide, what alternatives to existing financial services can we create. And that still exists. That is still a conversation that's happening. There are businesses out there doing that. But so much of the conversation today is about the speculation end of it, of, what's the Bitcoin price going to do? What is Donald Trump going to do to pump Bitcoin? Which ETFs are going to be approved to bring in more institutional money? And so we don't, the talk about crypto these days is much less about what can we do with it. When it comes to things like payments, I mean, many cryptos have been described as currencies in the past. They're not often well suited to being currencies. Bitcoin, for example, is a challenging one to use as a currency because volatile prices are not always a great thing when you're just trying to do a simple transaction. There's stable coins, which are sort of more useful for those types of payments, but then you run into the issue of like, why are we using a stable coin that's issued by like some shady company that like there is very little auditing? So, in terms of those types of things, I think there is a lot of work that would need to be done before it became a viable widely used product.
Yeah, and I think the industry has, not done as much to make the case for why you would want to do that or why you would need to do that. And, like you said, it's kind of seems like it's fallen by the wayside. I did want to get to this question here about Andrew, who writes that his cousin has lost all his crypto from identity fraud. He continues to invest wages into it. Is there like a specific sort of kind of addiction that's like crypto addiction? Is it something beyond just sort of gambling addiction that you see? Does it have its own character, and are there services that people can turn to if they need help?
Yeah, so I did a bunch of research into this a while ago, a couple of years ago really, where there is this sort of crypto version of gambling addiction that people are seeing. And it's really not just crypto. I mean, I spoke a little bit earlier about just sort of like the casino finance world. It happens with day traders, it happens with meme stocks, it happens with all aspects of this sort of casino capitalism that is out there. But there has been this explosion in gambling addiction with people who are using crypto basically as a speculative tool in ways that are very similar to gambling. And I've spoken to people who were had formally identified themselves as, people who had a gambling addiction in sort of the casino version, and then convinced themselves that, this was not gambling, this is investing, and that, they are making sound decisions for their financial future, and they are investing in crypto, not gambling. And then, months down the road, realize that it was the same behaviors and it was the same impulses. And I think that a lot of people have sought treatment in gambling addiction recovery services to treat crypto addictions. I'm not sure if there's any, clinical difference between crypto-related addiction and gambling addiction. That's probably a better question for, someone certified in that field. But
you have a fantastic newsletter, Citation Needed.
Thank you, whoever plugged that.
Are there any independent journalists you recommend subscribing to that write in the same vein?
Did you write this question? I would highly recommend Brian Merchant, who writes Blood in the Machine, which is an excellent tech-critical, AI-critical newsletter. There are actually some really amazing independent journalists out there who write on tech, broadly speaking, whether it's crypto or AI or just sort of tech, which is a very broad field. I'm a big fan of Ed Zitron, who writes a lot about AI these days. Paris Marks, you share a podcast with Paris, and Paris also writes the Disconnect newsletter. There are tons of people, and then
404 Media.
I was just going to say there are the sort of collectives like 404 Media who are doing just incredible tech journalism these days that you could never expect possible out of a 4-person staff.
Yeah, just inhuman, really. This is another good one too. Is there a realistic way of putting? And thank you, Molly. I appreciate that. Is there a realistic way of putting the cat back in the bag? Can regulation fight decentralized systems? What are some paths back to safer financial systems?
I don't think there's a way to put the cat back in the bag in the sense of like banning Bitcoin or banning crypto, and I've pretty much always said that, and I don't think that's a useful discussion, honestly, to be having. But there are absolutely ways to ensure consumer protections for people who are engaging with these systems. A lot of the companies and a lot of the abuses in the crypto world come out of the crypto industry. And I use that phrase a lot, crypto industry, to try to draw a distinction between the Coinbases and the Krakens and the Ripples and the big companies in the crypto world, the Binances if we're trying to go more global, and just like crypto in the sense of like a Bitcoin or someone who's mining on their computer or whatever it might be, because there's very different segments of that world, and the crypto industry is, I think, what needs regulation. I don't think that trying to regulate the software really makes sense. I don't think that banning crypto mining or banning people from running, a crypto validator or anything like that is a useful use of anybody's time, but making sure that the companies that people are interacting with cannot just absolutely steal their shirts is absolutely feasible and really quite necessary, I think, if we want crypto to be something that people feel like they can engage with. And I realize that's kind of a weird thing to hear coming from me, is like, do you even want crypto to be a thing for people to engage with? But the fact that I don't buy crypto and that I don't engage with crypto in that way, that I'm not speculating on cryptocurrency, doesn't mean that I think that nobody should be allowed to do it. I don't go to the casino either. It's not my thing, but I think people should be allowed to do that. There are a lot of things that I don't care for that many people do, and I defend their right to do that. But I don't think that people should be, forced to open themselves up to this degree of abuse and fraud when they are trying to do the things that they want to do, because the crypto industry has paid $200 million to be able to do that.
Yep. Round of applause to that for sure. And there was a question we didn't get to. It was just like, who's out there? Who's following the money? And the answer is Molly. Molly is following the money. Molly's keeping tabs on this. It's hard work, and we're all glad that you're out there doing it. So round of applause for Molly. Thanks so much for coming out, everyone.
Yes, thank
Cheers.
you.